time it is in the corner of the flat globe that you reside in. This is a draft preview special edition off schedule episode of Backyard Buckets, brought to you by Backyard Sports. Got the whole crew with us tonight. We're talking NBA draft. Bentley, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I've been brushing up on my French. Un, deux, trois, quatre. Yeah, I can count to four. I feel like French is going to play a large role in this evening's episode. But I'm doing well, Gary. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Yeah, for sure. French, especially last couple of years, French has been the prevailing language of the NBA draft. Ryan, how you doing, bud?
You know, it's funny he said that because I was going to put a French name as my name. I didn't do it, but I'm doing good. Y'all know I love the draft, especially when your team is bad like mine has been for a long time. Y'all should love the draft more in y'all's current state of affairs.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to be here to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think a fun draft. I actually think this will be a very fun draft.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit in terms of kind of what your guys' thoughts are on like fun, how you define fun with the draft, and kind of what you anticipate from this draft. In years past, we've seen when there's, let's say there's like 8 guys, right, that everybody kind of has a consensus that they can be guys in the NBA. We see some jostling, some moving, even within the top 8. The year we saw Trae Young traded for Luka Doncic, etc. We see some of that movement in that kind of plateau where we have the talent heavy portion of the draft, and then things maybe peter out a little bit and you get a couple of swaps here and kind of salary moves there. Do you think we're going to see a lot of action in this year's draft trade wise? Ryan, let's go to you first.
Sorry, I had to go off mute. Yeah, I actually expect there to be more, which maybe is counter to what people I think expect. But I think as uncertainty increases, variables increase with that to include the amount of trades that will happen, right? If my board is, 5 guys and the next team has 5 different guys as their top 5, right? Like 5 different, completely different guys, which is, I think, possible in this scenario. That means that you value someone significantly more than another team does. So there might be equities that a team wouldn't normally have because they had the Victor Wembanyama pick or the Miller pick or the Scoot pick, right? It's like, hey, we feel pretty confident, as does everybody else, about the value of this spot. Whereas if I'm like, I have Topic number 4 and someone else is like, I got your 9 as my number 4, so let's you take my 9 pick, you take 4, and we're good, right? I think it's much more conducive to a trade environment. Plus, I think there's a lot of stars who potentially could be traded as well. The Paul Georges of the world have been talked about. Mikal Bridges, maybe for the end of time, will be on the trade block until he wants to be traded. I think there's some middling guys, Brandon Ingram even. Not that he's a middling guy, but you know what I mean? There's some guys in the middle of the world that I think could be traded. So, yeah, I actually expect there to be a decent amount of trades.
Yeah, I'm curious, Mufasa Dreadlock, thanks for the comment. Thanks for joining. Thanks for tuning in. Who would you like to see OKC get at 3 if they do trade up to 3?
At 3, that's an easy choice. I mean, they take anybody that weighs more than 60 pounds, and they should be all right.
That's a good point.
For sure. Yeah, Ryan, I think that's a good point, though, right? Clingan. Yeah, maybe a Clingan at 3. He could be I think he could be a real helper, especially for that OKC lineup. We talked about that a little bit last week in terms of them needing to get a big body, whether it's a Clingan or a free agent or a trade or something along those lines. I think that's a solid potential fit. But back to Ryan's point, I think that's a good point, right? The uncertainty could potentially create a lot of what we would call maybe fun, a lot of intrigue, a lot of activity on draft night, because there could be a huge difference between how one team, values even a guy like Sarr, right? He's kind of consensus in that top 1, 2, 3. there might be a team that doesn't value him in that 1, 2, 3 area that might look at an opportunity to move back. Are we going to try to tank again for next year's draft? And you're looking at Cooper Flagg, right? Who's probably, unless somebody comes out of nowhere I shouldn't say nowhere, but comes out of the, that group that we don't necessarily think is going to be number 1 next year. It's that Cooper Flagg draft, right? Are you going to tank and try to get a guy like him and maybe you move back, get a couple more assets? So I think that's a good point, right? The uncertainty might breed some of that movement, that intrigue from team to team. Bentley, agree, disagree? You got a different thought on maybe the activity we would see, in the draft?
So every year we come into the draft, or seemingly every year we come into the draft, and it's like, all right, we know who's going 1. We kind of have an idea who's going 3. We kind of know who's going 5. Anywhere from 1 to 5 it feels almost set going into just about every recent draft, especially with the rise of social media and the picks come out ahead of time. And there's all this news and information floating around, right? But then from picks 8 to kind of 35, it's like things should move, things should shake. A lot of things should happen, right? So with a draft like the one we're going to have tomorrow night and on Thursday night, I don't think that there necessarily could be more movement than we see in previous years. I think that a draft such as this one, where the top end talent is less so easily identifiable, that it leaves more movement for the 1 through 3, 1 through 5 picks to be available, right? It opens the door for movement at the top end of the draft that we would normally see in previous years, like the Chet, Paolo, Jabari Smith draft, right? Nobody was trading out of those 3 picks because those were the 3 guys that you knew were going to be the high-end talents in that draft. This year, we don't know for sure, right? You could tell me that 6 different guys go number 1 overall. I'd be like, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But some of those guys, the teams that they're going to are going to have to open up roster spots for them because they have an overloaded amount of talent at that single position. They just value the guy in the draft, whether it be because of talent, whether it be because of cap implications, that it would be an April team, whatever it is, right? They would have to make a move to send out a veteran or send out a guy on a max contract to bring in the player from the draft that they value at that number 1 or number 2 overall spot, whichever it works out to be, right? Not that the Wizards have an overload of talent at any one position that they would have to offload somebody from the roster, but you kind of get what I'm saying, right? So I don't necessarily feel that there's going to be an absorbent amount of trades and movement just simply because the high-end talent isn't so easily identifiable. But I do think we could see movement within the top 3 that we have not seen in previous drafts. And that's what I think makes this a little bit more interesting, paired, again, with the talent level being so kind of flatline, basically all up and down the lottery, even down into the late teens and early 20s within this draft.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good perspective too, right? It might be a little more opportunity to move up into the top 5 than you would see in previous drafts, especially last year, right? As Ryan pointed out, the kind of top 3 that really separated themselves from the rest of last year's draft. You probably didn't have an opportunity to move into those spots, but maybe this year, with some of these guys that are considered at the top of this draft, you might have an opportunity to move up, maybe get one of them. Another question here. Ryan had mentioned Brandon Ingram might be a valuable trade asset. Any chance you could see Zion on the move? Do you think the Pellies, with some of the struggles he's had with weight, injuries, do you think any of that plays in? I'm assuming consensus here from us that teams would take the call if New Orleans made him, or make the call if New Orleans made him available, just based on how talented he is. Any chance you think the Pellies, are they going to, I know they've been kind of a fringe playoff team. They're still building around him. Anybody think that there's a chance the Pellies might move him? I see Bentley shaking his head. Ryan, I can't see your head shake or nothing.
I'll shake it for him.
Yeah, I'd be surprised, right? Brandon Ingram seems to be the guy they've decided doesn't make sense, probably because it's him or Zion. That's how they view it. It makes sense to me to get rid of Brandon Ingram and maybe find a spot for him. The hard part for, I know that's not the question, but the hard part to find Brandon Ingram a spot is, I just don't know where he fits. He wants the ball in his hand, but he's probably not a number 1 guy. He's probably a 2 or a 3, on a really good team. Probably a low end 2 or high end 3, but can that guy have the ball in his hands? I don't know. I just think it's hard to find a trade partner that makes sense. But I don't see Zion going anywhere. I think he's one of the best offensive players in the league, and you'd be remiss to get rid of him. I think.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. All right. Good question. I think we got consensus on the answer there. All right, let's move on to our next topic. I want to kind of float this out there. So there's been a lot of talk about the, not as high-end talent in this draft, but I want to pick your brains a little bit. Ryan, I'm going to go your way first with this question. Are there players that you like that don't seem to be on others' radars? So I'm looking at like the top 5 to 12 are kind of the guys that everybody's talking about and kind of where they're going to end up. Where they get drafted is probably the bigger disparity between those players as opposed to like them being the more talented options in this draft. So who's a guy or a couple of guys that you like from this draft that aren't necessarily being talked about on the national stage right now?
I got 3 guys. I'll give one. Bentley knows the one I'm going to say because I've told him about 7 times. Jalen Tyson is a guy I really like coming out of Cal. I told Bentley I was going to do all the foreign players, but I will choose an American to start it off. I really like Jalen Tyson. I think Jalen Tyson and Dalton Knecht are very similar players, and I think Jalen Tyson is a better defender. I think Knecht might be pardon the pun, a better connective player than Tyson is. Tyson likes to have the ball in his hands. But Jalen Tyson shot 37% off the catch from 3. Like, he can clearly do it without the ball in his hands. He just needed to do it as a player at Cal. He's had a lot of like personal strife within his career. He's a junior, but still younger than Knecht. Knecht's pretty old. I think he's gonna be like 37 his rookie year or something like that. So I think Jalen Tyson, I have it like 15. I've seen people say he's like 40th. Some people have said like in the 20s, but I have him literally right at the end of the lottery. And I'd even be okay with the end of the lottery taking him, if he makes sense there. But I think a team at the end of the draft that needs a off the bench creator or a guy who can fill it up and defend a little bit on the wing at 6'7", 218 with some experience. I have him as like a Gordon Hayward in his like early years kind of vibe for me. There's your cross race comparison for everybody. But yeah, I really like him. I think he could go in the second round. He could go like 20th. Like, that wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of mocks with him kind of early second round, top of the second round, somewhere between 30 to 38, 39 round, before 40. It seems like he's been mostly in the mocks I've seen. But yeah, if he ends up in the teens, I think that's a sneaky pick that could potentially. I liked seeing. I saw 2, maybe 3 times him play last year, and I thought he was pretty solid, even on the ball. I thought he was pretty good. So I don't know that he's going to be the dominant ball handler on any team in the NBA, but
I like him to Milwaukee. I just want to throw that out there. I think y'all saw my mock. I mocked him to Milwaukee at, what are they, 23 or something like that. He makes so much sense coming off the bench in Milwaukee as like a guy who can put the, because they have that issue, right? Guys coming off the bench can't score. They haven't had a guy like that in a while.
Middleton can't stay healthy anymore. It seems he could be a guy who can supplement when Middleton's inevitably misses his 25 games next year.
Yeah, exactly. And and he's older, right? So he makes sense in Milwaukee as they're trying to compete. So that's kind of where I see the fit. If he's going to go like 20s, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, for sure. Bentley, who's a guy you like that not a lot of people are talking about?
Oh man, some of that not a lot of people are talking about. I feel like, so this is a player people are talking about him, but maybe not in the ways that I think are deserved, right? Ryan went really far off the board, as he tends to do, stray far away from the path, but whatever, we'll let it slide this time. Can I give you 2? Do you care if I give you 2? All right, so I'll give you one. Maybe my favorite player in this draft. 6-foot guard, 6'1" guard, I guess, coming out of Kentucky, and it's not Reed Shepherd. I like Rob Dillingham. That man shot almost 50% on catch and shoot threes last year. He also passed out of the pick and roll 57% of the time as the ball handler. Like that shows development as the year goes along, being a ball handler in the pick and roll, being willing to make the pass, get the ball out, and put it in rotation, right? Make that defense move and work. He also is just electric. He probably has the best handle of anybody in this draft class. I do not think he's going to go number 1 overall to Atlanta, but I might, if I were allowed to gamble on it in the state of Virginia, sprinkle a little flyer on that one. He's a guy, especially, so I mentioned in the previous segment that, like, if you have an overloaded amount of talent at one position, like Atlanta does in the backcourt, if they're willing to make a move off of, say, Trae Young, which is what I said something weeks and weeks ago on the show that they probably should do, if they're willing to move off of Trae Young, you so aptly brought up not taking Luka Doncic. And if you remember in that draft, they said they could not market him in Atlanta. They said, a white boy from fucking Europe is not going to play in Atlanta. Who is better than Rob Dillingham to market? He played in Overtime Elite. He played in I believe it's Overtime Elite. He played at Donda Academy, and he went to Kentucky to play for Cal. Like, that's as big time as it gets. He's willing to play in the spotlight. He was the guy at Kentucky last year when they needed big buckets down the stretch, not in the NCAA tournament because, of course, they lost. But, in the SEC tournament where, again, they lost to LSU. But, like, regardless, in big games down the stretch, he had a big bucket against North Carolina early in the season, if you remember that game. I really like Rob Dillingham. I think he's going to be a highly skilled NBA player. Again, if I could bet on it in Virginia, not a bad pick to win Rookie of the Year next year. Provided he goes through a situation where he's going to get the playing time, he's going to be able to have the ball in his hands and run the offense and control the flow of the game. I really like Rob Dillingham. I think he has potential to be very good in the NBA. I'm not going to come out and say he's going to be fucking Steph Curry or whatever, but, like, the guy can shoot the ball, he can get to the cup, he makes his free throws, and he's a willing passer. Like, those are all aspects of a stud point guard in the NBA today, right?
And he's got the track record of being a guard at Kentucky.
That certainly does not hurt him. As we know, John Wall.
We've seen a lot of them be very successful in the NBA.
Yes. And then there's another guy. This one definitely further down the board. I really like Isaiah Collier. I watched a decent amount. Gary, you know me, Pac-12 After Dark, kind of our thing.
Yep.
It carries over into basketball season as well. Saturday night. Now, they were on TV a lot because of Bronny James being on the team. I don't want to talk about LeBron James Jr. I want to talk about Isaiah Collier. That man is an absolute tank on the basketball court. I get that he's a little bit undersized. I don't even want to say undersized. He's 6'2.5" is what he's listed at. That is on the smaller side of NBA guards, but, like, he has the body to be able to get in the paint and bang. He was the only good player on a bad team in the Pac-12 last year, with all the pressure in the world to be a successful team because LeBron James Jr. was on that team, right? I think that if you put him in a situation where he has better players around him, take some of the scoring load off of his shoulders, he could thrive in a situation like that. I guess him being like a backup kind of fiery guy off the bench, heat check kind of dude, get in, spray the ball around, hit some threes, get into the paint, hopefully, because that's seemingly a trend in the NBA this day. Guards are kind of almost shying away from going in amongst the trees, but he has the body to get downhill. He has the body to get to the rim, and I believe he will be able to develop the vision to get into the paint and spray the ball out to open shooters. So I personally like Isaiah Collier. I think Rob Dillingham might be my favorite guy in this draft. Admittedly, Ryan said he was going to do all the foreign guys, so I'm just talking mostly from a college basketball point of view at this point. There are some other guys I like, but I think those, Dillingham not getting as much buzz, and Isaiah Collier certainly not getting a lot of buzz.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of piggyback on that before we go back to Ryan, because in a mock I saw earlier, maybe yesterday or earlier this week at some point, the Knicks have the 24th and 25th pick, I believe, back-to-back, or 23rd, 24th. I think it's 24, 25. This mock had Collier going to the Knicks, and then the very next pick, Terrence Shannon going to the Knicks, who I think – now, I'm not here to talk about a legal engagement, right? He was found not guilty, so teams are moving on from that. I think from a talent perspective, without that shadow cast on him as a prospect leading up to the combine and the draft process, I think he would be higher in the draft, up in the teens, maybe even potentially touched in the top 10, that sort of thing, because he was an absolute fucking lightning bolt the last, 2.5 months of the season. When Illinois made the conscious decision to go to iso ball, they became a problem for everybody they played and made an incredible run in the NCAA tournament, busted a lot of brackets. So I think Terrence Shannon is a guy, he's a little bit older too, so I think that's a little bit of a knock as well on him in terms of his prospects. We know everybody likes those 18, 19-year-olds, but I think a guy like Terrence Shannon who can give you instant offense, and if he does end up with the Knicks, I know there's a lot of talk of them moving one or both of those draft picks that they have. If he ends up on the Knicks, a guy that maybe can come off the bench and spell Brunson and really give them some, scoring off the bench, I think that helps a lot, because we saw in the playoffs, they went real short in the rotation and then paid the price for it with all of the injuries. I think a guy like Terrence Shannon can give them scoring if he does go to the Knicks, but I think regardless of where he ends up, it stuck out to me in that mock that you mentioned Collier, and I saw that they both went to the Knicks in that mock. I think Terrence Shannon is a guy who isn't getting a lot of talk because I think he's a little bit nuclear right now. People don't really want to talk about him much, but I think from a pure basketball standpoint, he's got potential to be a really good fit on an NBA team as like a first scorer off the bench, second scorer off the bench, but a guy that can really contribute on the offensive end. He's really, really hard to cover, as we saw throughout the NCAA tournament.
I was talking to Ryan today, and we were just talking about this draft and how seemingly a lot of these guys are going to end up coming off the bench, right? Just kind of how it's going to go. And I said, this may be the all-time record for most players compared to Lou Williams. In a draft.
That's good. That's a really good comparison, because I was actually having a conversation with a couple other folks, and I was like, we're gonna spend a lot of time during the draft trying to figure out how these analysts are gonna talk about these players. This is a roster filler draft, right? Like, This is you're building out your fourth and fifth guy, or you're building out your seventh and eighth guy in the rotation, that sort of thing. So, all right, Ryan, I know it's been a little bit of a deliberation for you while we kind of waxed a bit, but I know you said you had at least 3 guys that you wanted to talk about, so the floor is yours, bud.
Well, now that I'm on the clock, I would like to first address opinions. I like what Bentley had to say. I do think the fall that we've seen recently, especially in the mocks and what we were talking about, Rob Dillingham, is interesting. I wonder how real it is, right? We always see that in the draft where there's this guy's like, we're not like a big fan, and then he gets taken like 4th.
It's like, lying season.
Yeah. And I think Rob Dillingham might be the best offensive player in this draft. And there's some value there, like a San Antonio could take him, right? They got 4 and 8. I could see that. We talked about that today with Wembanyama kind of covering up his defensive deficiencies and letting the offensive game really highlight pick and roll with Wembanyama. I think that'd be really interesting. I like that. I think Collier.
Oh, he muted himself. Oh.
Uh-oh.
Would now be a good time for me to just talk about the Duke prospects, or do we have a separate topic section for that?
Let's take some time to talk about the Trinity College prospects while Ryan reconnects here. Are you back, Ryan? I see the mute get toggled.
Tough. I know he was going to say he really likes Devin Carter, the junior coming out of Providence. I also would like to piggyback off of that, but for maybe different reasons than Ryan would like to bring up. I just want to bring up that Devin Carter started his college basketball career at the University of South Carolina, as did Gigi Jackson. Unfortunately for both of them, they transferred out before they got good this year under Lamont Paris. But living in a hypothetical world, as I like to do, if both Devin Carter and Gigi Jackson had played this past season with Carter Bowles, they probably wouldn't have lost in the first round to Oregon in the NCAA tournament and may have gone on a Final Four run like they did with
Frank.
Frank Martin was the coach, but the guy who won SEC Player of the Year.
Not.
Oh my God, it's gonna drive me crazy.
Oh my God. It's a.
What is that guy's
two-sided
name?
game, too. Oh my God. Oh,
I should know this right off the top of my head.
you should. You should.
Am I back?
You are back.
There he is.
While I
I
look up this name that we can't think of.
Okay, so I switched mics because for some reason it said my mic was unplugged, which is not true. It is right here in front of me, and it is not unplugged. Sorry, continue what you were saying.
Thornwell is the guy.
Yeah, Sedarius Thornwell. That's right. Yes.
Oh,
Anyway.
Sedarius. Yeah.
All yours, Ryan.
Okay, sorry. I like the.
And we talk about DJ Burns going in the second. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a terrible pick.
You go to
I
the Eagles, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be true.
OKC has a football team now.
I think Isaiah Collier was a good shout out. I think you're betting on the potential. He was at one point talked about as the first pick in the draft. I think he's like another guy who needs the ball in his hands, but a place like Phoenix could really use him, I think, as another option. But I'll talk about my two guys. I thought those were good shots. All right, I'll get into the international ones. Nikola Jurisic is a guy I really like who played for Mega in Serbia. He played with another Nikola Topic, who's viewed as a much better prospect. But I think Jurisic reminds me a lot of Denny Avdia, who y'all know I love. I love a big wing creator who can defend a little bit. I think he needs the ball in his hand a lot of the time, which I think is the problem with Avdia. The Wizards just kind of are stand in the corner and shoot, which is not his skill set. I think they're starting to fix that over the last year or so. But I really think Jurisic, if given that opportunity, could be a contributor if he's allowed to kind of do some things with the ball. But he's big, 6'8", 209 weight. He's not super long. He's just got a 6'8" wingspan, but he's just big in general. Has some consistency issues shooting the ball. Not an amazing defender, so that's kind of where the Avdia comparison falls off because Avdia is a better defender. But I think offensively, when Topic went down, Jurisic took over as the primary guy, and his numbers went crazy. And so I think that shows that the potential is there. I have him in the 20s. I think 26 on my board, which most people I think have him in the 40s or 30s.
I've seen a lot of mocks. He's around 40 to 50. Yeah.
So I think I'm 10 higher than most people, at least, maybe even more than that. So that's a guy I like a lot. I would actually love if the Rockets could get him in the second round. Excuse me. My other guy is Juan Nunez, who I've talked about to Bentley. He cannot shoot to save his life. He at best was a 32% three-point shooter, and that might be being nice. He played in Spain. He's a Spanish player, played in Real Madrid, and then I think was in Germany for a little while as well. One of the best passers in the draft, if not the best passer in the draft, can get to the basket. He's got kind of a Tyus Jones kind of play style to him, in my opinion. That way, he's a shorter Josh Giddey, maybe is a good way to talk about him. He's 6'5", at the point guard spot, he's got the size for it. He just cannot shoot. He's 61% from the free throw line, so the metrics are not good. But man, if he ever figures out how to be an okay shooter, you get an elite passer, an elite driver, a guy who gets other people involved. He's got the size, right? 6'5" at the one. In the second round, I have him in 35 range. I think if you're getting him probably later than that, more than likely. I think it's great. I just think he's going to have some issues with the athleticism in the league and like I said, shooting. But you get the playmaking. He's quick. You get the speed you want, and the pick and roll. He can run that all day. So that's a guy I love as a second round flyer. That in a few years, if the shot becomes okay, I think he's a starter in the league if that happens. And if he's not, he's probably out of the league. But you take those shots to get a legitimate contributor, I think, in the second round, if he just ever develops a consistent shooting stroke.
I think I'd seen a comparison. I think it was Nunez that I'd seen a comparison that he was a bigger Ricky Rubio, which I thought if it was him, if I remember correctly, I think that's an okay comparison because Rubio was kind of that guy, right? He was a little more reluctant to shoot as opposed to being a bad shooter because he was a better shooter later in his career because he was willing to shoot, but he was much more the pick and roll facilitator early on. And I believe it was Juan Nunez that I'd seen that. I think that's a decent comparison.
Yeah, it doesn't shock me that the Spanish point guard gets compared to Ricky Rubio. It's like, what? Wow, this native Spaniard sure reminds me of that other native Spaniard that I know.
That's fair. And you had, let's see, is that all the ones you had?
I have one more that I will throw out just real quick.
Yeah.
This is an American. I really like Cam Christie a lot, a guy who's been mocked in the second round. His brother plays in the league, but I think he's a 6'6" guy who has some shooting potential. His brother plays. He's got like kind of
his brother's in the league.
I think
if I were the same height as Max Christie, I would be playing more than him. I'm just putting that out there.
I think Max Christie is going to make like $7-8 million a year. He's a free agent. I think he's going to get signed and like make some money, which is like, that's good. Like $7-8 million is like, that's a legit, like for a guy who was awful in college and got drafted off of his high school tape. I think his brother's super good for this range, in the 40s, like mid 40s. That's a guy I like a lot. Good in the pick and roll as a ball handler. Pretty good spot up shooter, pretty good dribble jump shooter. He's super young. I think he's 18 still. If not, he's like early 19. Not a great guy going to the rim. Won't do a lot for rebounding for you. But, a 6'6" guy who can shoot, like that has some value, in my opinion, for a lot of teams in the second round. So he's the opposite of Juan Nunez is what I'm saying. And I think that archetype is really interesting. And those guys happen to stick around the league, I think, more often than not. So if you're in the 40s and he's available, I would take a shot at him personally.
I like it. Bentley, any others you want to highlight real quick before we shift gears?
Just kind of looking at these mock drafts, right, of guys that you maybe wouldn't think of that are lower. I think Pelle Larsson has a chance to be a guy in the NBA. He's a very smart basketball player who kind of lets his emotions take over a little bit. I think as he gets older, which is a crazy thing to say, but a 23-year-old going into the NBA, I think that he could certainly find a spot on a roster. I think that Phoenix, I know we talked about Collier going to Phoenix being a good fit. I think if Pelle Larsson, obviously the Arizona thing, he's right there or whatever. But location aside, I think that Pelle Larsson would probably be a good fit in Phoenix. He's kind of a more polished offensive player than are some of these raw point guards coming out. He's fairly large. He's 6'5". It kind of gives him a little beef on the front line. He's a tenacious defender. I like Pelle Larsson. I'm not telling you that he's going to be incredible. But he doesn't need to be to work in Phoenix, right? If that's kind of somewhere that they could snag him. Saying that Cam Spencer is going to be an NBA player. Cam Spencer to me feels like, you guys remember last year in Summer League, Justin Champagnie was like crazy for the Spurs. Like Cam Spencer gives me that kind of vibe. Like he's going to be at Summer League and people are going to be like, oh my God, Cam Spencer, what a dog. And then like kind of not really
the big
make
boys
it.
are going to come in and play. And...
Yeah, like that's kind of where I feel like that is going to end up. I'm not entirely sure. I can save some of my like overhyped guys for the next segment if you want. But those are just like a couple, because I have at least one that I'm looking at right now on my screen that I definitely feel is overhyped. But again, I'll save that for later. Yeah,
let's transition to that, man. You're up first. Give me somebody you think that doesn't deserve the hype that they're getting right now.
Okay, so number one overhyped guy for me personally is Jacoby Walter, the freshman coming out of Baylor. That man takes some of the absolute worst shots I have ever seen. Like just the most ill-advised fucking chuck this thing up. I understand if you go watch the tape, there's some like they call them grenades, right? It's a late shot clock. Somebody kicks in the ball with 1.3 on the shot clock, and it's like, I got to put this up. But also like above the break shots, just in the flow of the offense, half court, like this is supposed to be a skip pass or this is supposed to be like a swing it around. And he's like, I'm being closed out on by two guys. Let me take a dribble in and pull up. That's what I'm going to do. Like just the most ridiculous shots. And sometimes they go in. Don't get me wrong. He's extremely talented. But like, I don't know that his basketball IQ has yet risen to the point where he should be talked about as like a late lottery, early 20s pick kind of guy. I totally understand that we're drafting off potential, and this is not the highest upside of drafts possible. But that's a guy that I would just kind of tend to stay away from if it were me. I'm not sure I would want him on my team. Tyler Kolek, the mock that I'm looking at here has him at 15. I mean, what are we doing, guys? Like, he's 23. He's not Dalton Connect. He's a heady guy. Like, he was a very, very good college player. Ryan and I were talking about it earlier today. One of the comps we saw was like Jalen Brunson. It's like, okay, like he has a similar play style because his body is similar to him. Like, he's a little bit taller probably, but like they both have kind of broad shoulders. They're both pretty strong. He can get into the paint. He has this like really unique, it's almost like he dribbles into the paint. It's like a fake spin and he gets the defender to bite and then he goes up with his left hand. It's a really cool move. It worked great for him in college. I don't know that it's going to work for him in the NBA. With the big men having the ability to recover a lot faster than they did in college, right? I'm not trying to knock Tyler Kolek, but having him in the top 15 is kind of insane to me personally. Obviously, it was 15 to Miami, which just kind of is on par for their pick last year with Jaime Jaquez Jr. picking the old men. Tyler Kolek will make an NBA roster. I think he'll play. He'll be a fine player. I have to preface everything I'm saying. I should have done this off the rip, right? Like, I'm not confident in my ability to mock any of these guys specifically because the talent is so flatlined at the top, right? If he goes to top 15, I don't know that anything would surprise me in this draft. Do I think he is deserving of a top 15 pick? In this year's draft, maybe. But, like, in a typical NBA draft, he's low 20s, right? Like, he's not a top 15 guy coming out or coming into the NBA, right, on any given year. The almost elephant in the room here, Zach Edey.
I was waiting for it. I
get it. He was great in college, but
he'll be an all-star in China in 2026.
He's big. He's one of Ryan's favorite terms. He's big for no reason. Like, he's not. I don't know that he's special offensively. We know that he can't guard anyone defensively unless they're standing still in the paint. He'd be fine against Rudy Gobert probably, but like
he's got one matchup a year.
Yeah, like what are we doing? I mean, he couldn't even guard DeAndre Ayton probably, and that's kind of saying something. Like, Ayton's good, but like that's the kind of guy you're gonna have to guard in the NBA. Ayton's athletic. Ayton can move. He can step back and hit a little jumper. Like, these are the guys as a big man in the NBA that you're gonna have to match up against. And I just don't think that Edey has the athleticism or the foot speed to do that. He trips over his own feet while running backwards up the court after getting hacked 17 times into the basket. Like, that's his game. I just don't. I'm not an Edey guy. I hope he goes to OKC though.
I've seen him mocked as high as 12 to OKC. Ryan, talk to me about some guys that are getting some hype that you don't necessarily agree with.
Well, I think because of my Jalen Tyson love, I have to say Dalton Connect's getting too much hype. You know, everybody's like, I want Dalton Connect, and I say we have Dalton Connect at home, and his name's Jalen Tyson. We don't want Edey. Yeah, you do. You do.
No, he wants Zach Edey.
Yes, I get it. Yeah, I like Connect, but I don't like him like at 5. Like, I think that's a little high for me, especially like Detroit taking him at 5 is crazy, which I've seen like that mocked a bunch of times. Doesn't do it for me personally. I like him, but I have him in the same range as Jalen Tyson, which is like into the lottery, that range. And I probably would rather trade back and try to get Tyson if I could. Obviously, that's a perfect scenario. You can't always do that. but that's kind of where I am. Another guy, Ryan Dunn. Little fact about Ryan Dunn, maybe the worst offensive player I've ever seen. That is going to get drafted. Like, just god awful. I don't know if y'all know this, but at the combine, he did his drills with the centers.
Yep.
Because he probably is like, I'm going to look pretty good next to these big, tall, slow guys. And like my ball handling won't look so bad next to Zach Edey. Like, that's crazy. He is a small forward, can guard all 5 positions, but really a small forward, power forward on defense, and a center on offense, because that's his only skill, is to be by the basket and put the ball in the basket when he's close to it. He's 6'7". That like doesn't make any sense to me, right?
Chuck Hayes.
Like, he has to develop another skill. Like, people are like, the Knicks are going to take him. I think that's egregious to take him in the first round. Second round, yeah, you try to like teach him to like do something on offense and like let him sit for a year or two. Sure, I think that's reasonable. But like, if the Knicks take him just because he's good at defense, so we're going to take him, that's crazy to me. Because if anything, the Knicks need another creator. And they're going to take a guy who literally not just can't create, can't score when other people create for him. Yeah. Like, I think if he was in the corner wide open, people would just not defend him. It would be 4 on 5.
And they probably wouldn't pay the price.
Like Josh Giddey looked bad, he would be 10 times worse, because Josh Giddey at least has some offensive talent. Ryan Dunn is unplayable in the playoffs, in my opinion, and probably mostly unplayable in the regular season in his current iteration.
If you're unplayable in the NBA in the regular season, that's trouble.
Now, do I think he's interesting because of how he might be the best defensive prospect, on the wing in years? I think like that's fair, right? Like, take a guy, he can shut people down, and maybe he becomes like a slasher over time and like has some like offensive ability. Sure. But at 20, 21, 22, like, that's crazy to me. I've also seen mocks where he's like 50th. So I'm much more on he's at 50th to me than he is in the 20 range. So I just, that one blows my mind. I agree with the Kolek thing, like 15's wild. The Heat cannot make that mistake again, just drafting like a guy who can contribute now. They're not good enough to do that. I hope to God they don't. I hope they take somebody who might actually do something like in 3 years, because I think they're going to be rebuilding before they know it. So I'm just throwing that out there, that Kolek shot makes a lot of sense to me. Another guy, A.J. Johnson, hyper athletic, doesn't really do anything else. It's just flashes of athleticism. He just doesn't do it for me. And people are like, he's going to be this great scoring guard. Like, well, he's inefficient, inconsistent, has no strength, but he jumps high. Like, that doesn't do it for me. Some lateral quips, but his metrics are god awful. He's like in the bottom 20th percentile in almost every single offensive metric because he can't do anything. He's got Ryan Dunn capabilities. It's embarrassing. Don't take that guy. If you're thinking like early second, he's like a late pick as well. I got one more I wrote down. Give me 1 second. I got to go through my list of people I didn't include. I actually love this guy and I forgot to mention him. Justin Edwards is a guy I don't love. He did get better as the season went on, but like another guy who's just athletic for no reason. Similar to AJ. He is a pretty good cutter. He's like decent finishing at the rim, but like, I don't know. Just, I don't think he knows what he's doing on offense a lot of the time. And that concerns me for a guy who was viewed as this transcendent, like, athletic talent. Like, if you don't know where to be on offense, your athleticism doesn't do anything. That's just my opinion. Like, some of the greatest offensive players are not athletic for a reason. And being, Blake Griffin, maybe the ultimate like power forward athletic guy, he knew where to be, right? He knew the angles to take. He knew when to cut and things like that. I don't necessarily always see it for Edwards, though I think he's an okay cutter. I just don't see it. So those are probably the guys I would throw out. The guy I said that I like that I forgot to include, I'll just throw him here at the end. I really like a Dim Bona a lot as a backup big in the league. Has like maybe the best motor in the draft, just like constantly going. He's 6'10" with a almost 7'4" wingspan. Like he's got some good size. He's got like a Andre Drummond vibe to him, I think. Like that kind of player, which, as a backup big, I think you got to be happy. Can't do anything himself, right? Like he needs people to create for him. He fouls a lot, not shocking for a guy that's like high energy. But like if you're getting 15 minutes out of him, 20 minutes, like I think he's great, like early second. I'd be really happy to get him if I'm looking for a backup big. So that's my last guy. I inverted the question at the end to be positive.
Yeah, the positivity sandwich, right? So I want to circle back on what Bentley said about Jacoby Walter. Like, I think he projects as a 3-and-D guy, but to be honest, I don't know that he's very good on defense, right? So I think you're kind of going to lose some of that there, and I think some of the hype that he's getting going that high is based on some of that kind of expectation that he's going to be. I don't know, like. I don't want to compare him to Bruce Bowen, but like 3-and-D guys, he's kind of the archetype of that. And I don't think that's what Jacoby Walter brings to the table. So just want to foot stomp a little bit on one of the guys Bentley brought up.
Can I give you one that's a little bit hot takey?
Yeah.
That Ryan did not bring up. And I don't know if you have a list of guys that you dislike more than others. This one is a guy who's expected to go very high in the draft. He was one of the larger recruits to go to UConn in the last few years. I'm not super high on Stephon Castle, someone who shoots 26% from three and is supposed to be a guard in the NBA. I get that, like, his intangibles and him doing literally everything else on the floor. According to him, I don't think he's a point guard. His camp and everyone says he's a point guard. I've listened to multiple Dan Hurley interviews in the last couple of weeks. Says he's a point guard. I watched a lot of UConn. Cam Spencer was the fucking point guard on that team.
Yep.
I don't necessarily dislike Stephon Castle. I just think he's getting a lot more hype than he probably deserves. His comparison that I've seen most people talk about him, like player comp, right? Iguodala. Iguodala shot 33% for his career from three. If Stephon Castle shoots 30% for his career from three, I will be pretty shocked, truthfully. I get that, like, it's an upside play. You take the swing. I told Brian the other day that if Washington is going to take a swing on a player, they should take Stephon Castle at number 2 overall, because you have to hope for that upside, right? If you're taking a guy at 2 in a draft like this, it's got to be someone that you believe can develop into like an elite player. I don't know that I see it, because they're going to draft him as a point guard to play him at the point guard position. And if you are not demanding respect that your guy guards you around the arc, you're just being ineffective at creating space, which is what a guard in the NBA is supposed to do. I get that, like, shooting guard. The guard thing in the NBA is kind of out the window. It's like a wing now, like 2, 3, 4. That's kind of like all the same thing now. 1, 2, they're pretty similar. Like, if you were a guard in the NBA who's going to be the primary ball handler, you have to demand attention 25 feet from the rim. Like, you just do. And if you have no pull-up threat at all whatsoever, what is it going to matter, right? Like, we just talked about Josh Giddey getting played off the court in the playoffs because he was ineffective from shooting the ball from range. I don't know that Castle is going to be valuable enough to merit such a high draft pick, but I would absolutely understand why teams want to take him that high. Like, I get it. It's just not my cup of tea.
Yeah, I've seen him in the top 5 in most mocks, and I'm with you. He was another guy on my list. You've kind of nailed basically the list I had, and I knew Edey was going to come up because I had confidence in you guys that Edey would come up. But yeah, Castle's another. I like the idea of potentially, right, Washington taking a swing, and if he sucks, we suck, and we get Cooper Flagg, right? Like that's kind of the out, right? The silver lining to being the worst team in the league next year would be the best odds at getting Cooper Flagg, even though the odds have been kind of leveled off a bit. But yeah, no, I think that's a good one. But I agree, Castle was a guy. I watched UConn games, and like he was a grinder. He was kind of the dirty work guy. He was the hustle guy. He wasn't a game changer. I know that was a talent-rich team, but I'm with you. Cam Spencer was the point guard, and then like I'm not sure Stephon Castle was the third best player on that team, to be honest. So,
Yeah.
high for him, but I think the ceiling's fine, and the work rate's fine. But Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think both of you are crazy. I have him at number 2 on my board. I think he has a clear route to being a successful NBA player, even if he doesn't shoot. I think he probably will develop a mid-range game more than likely, just because guys of his talent usually do. But like, he's already an elite defensive player. A good slasher, a good finisher at the basket. Like you actually do get like offense. There is offensive ability there, right? In the right system, he's going to be good. Will he be great? Is the shooting swing, right? Like that's the swing. But I think in a draft like this, where it's like the con is shooting and everything else you feel really good about, like that's a guy I love personally. There's plenty of non-shooters in the NBA or very bad shooters. I think that's a guy to take, and at his size too. He's big. He's really big at his size. Like can run the pick and roll, good in transition, finishes at the rim. Like I said, just can't shoot. And if he becomes, like you said, a 33% shooter, like that's an all-star. Like
I'm not discrediting his ability to be an effective NBA player. Like I said, he does literally everything else on the floor. Like he cuts, he finishes at the rim. I get it. He defends hard as shit. He's a very, very good basketball player. Don't get me wrong. Taking him super high just would not be something that I feel as comfortable with. But then I also have to temper expectations because this is like such a floor-raising draft.
NBA draft.
Exactly, right? So it's like I don't know if that guy goes to the
position though, right? If he was a 2 or a 3, I think that's fine if you're going to draft him high for the reasons Ryan laid out, right? I don't disagree with his ability as a basketball player necessarily. I don't know that he threatens with the ball in his hand. I think he's better off the ball. I just think that if you're going to draft him, maybe he is Andre Iguodala, right? And you just hope that he develops that 30 to 33% three-point shot, right? If he's a guy that can slash and can finish at the rim and you play him off ball, perfectly fine. I'm with you, Bentley, on the fact that I don't know that you're going to draft him as your point guard and roll the ball out there and say, all right, Stephon, you're initiating the offense for us. I think he'll be a fine basketball player. I do agree with that. Yeah. I don't disagree with Ryan on that. But all right, well, let's circle the wagons here and let's talk teams. So we've talked a lot of players tonight. Let's talk teams. So Ryan, I'm going to go your way first. Give me a team that you're super intrigued about. And we'll kind of go around robin and hit, a handful of teams here, but I want to start your way, Ryan. Talk to me about a team that you're super intrigued to watch in the draft the next couple nights.
Well, I'll do the easy one, and I'll say the Wizards, I think, are one of the more interesting ones. I think having the 2 pick, a lot of options there. We kind of don't know. It's not like the draft starts at 2. The draft starts at 1 this time, so we're going to have so many variables already at 2. Do you trade away? They also have a second first-round pick that could come into play. They also got Kuzma. Like, are they going to get off him? Like, there's a lot of interesting things with them. Also, I think their team, the point of where they are in their team building is like pretty early on in comparison to a lot of other teams, which this draft maybe is not the best for that, but I think is going to change the way that their philosophy is, right? Like, that's my point about Stephon Castle. Like, that's a guy, like Bentley said, that's a guy swing at, right? if you're the Wizards. Even like Ron Holland, I think it'd be too high for him, but like guys who have those abilities, like, man, if they just figure this out, this is like an all-star. And I think that's really going to shake the draft up quite a bit if that's the route they go. I worry that they're going to go like a Klingon route and just kind of be safe, but also Alex Sarr is an option, right? Like, and Alex Sarr could end up being just pretty mid, like very easily. He's a flashy guy, but could be pretty mid. But I want to see them take that swing, and then I want to see them try to move some stuff around with their second pick. I think that would be the most interesting thing. And I think it'd be good for the city to see some potential for the future.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty intriguing draft for the Wizards too. You mentioned the philosophy. If they go Sarr, I think it says a lot about kind of where they think they are in the backcourt. If they go with a backcourt person, it might be that situation that Bentley mentioned, right? You're trying to throw as many resources as possible at that position to figure it out. So year one, really this year, finally year one of the rebuild. They didn't lean into it as heavily as I thought they might early on, but it seems like they've positioned themselves pretty well. A little bit of lottery luck as well to end up with number 2 in a draft that you weren't really sure you even wanted number 1. So it will be interesting to see where they go. Really intrigued, obviously, as a Wizards fan, right? Curious to see how they go. Bentley, any thoughts on Washington?
I just can't wait to see which jersey I'm going to have to get rid of in like 4 years. It's going to be great. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that's the state of being a Wizards fan. Give me a team you're intrigued about tomorrow and Thursday.
Well, first to answer the question, I believe it's going to be on ESPN.
Yeah.
ABC, ESPN, one of the two. One of the ESPN networks. But so my team is picking 20th. So it's a little – we talked about the ability to move within the draft, especially higher in the draft because of the variance in this year's lack of knowledge, right? I'm picking Cleveland. They've already made moves this year that have – or at least one move. They fired their coach and they hired Kenny Atkinson, who, as we know, was the Nets coach whenever Jared Allen was there, right? So they already have an established relationship, which – if you kind of read the tea leaves, that almost seems like they are not going to move Jared Allen and they're going to run it back with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley both, right? That's kind of the assumption you would make based off of hiring the player's previous coach, which then opens the door to either Donovan Mitchell leaving or them moving on from one of my favorite point guards in the whole NBA, Darius Garland, which brings us back to the team that Ryan mentioned earlier, the New Orleans Pelicans. I'm going to throw money aside. I don't think that Brandon Ingram was a good fit in Cleveland, right? I don't know that works there, right? Too many mouths to feed. If you have Donovan Mitchell, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, and then you add Brandon Ingram in a swap for probably Darius Garland. I would love to see Darius Garland end up in either New Orleans or San Antonio. But to me, the moves that have already occurred, specifically the coaching hire with Kenny Atkinson in Cleveland, that makes Cleveland a very interesting destination, right? They have the ability to move some guys around. They have the 20th pick. They can put in a deal. I don't know what they're going to do, right? I don't know anything that's going to happen tomorrow night because this draft is wild like that. But I'm extremely interested to see not only how their draft is going to end up, but the rest of their off season, right? Who they're going to take at 20, because there is so much like mid-round talent in this draft, roster fillers, as you called them, Gary. I think that they have the ability to take someone there who can be an impact player, who can be a guy off the bench that matters for them. And then do they make a move? Do they even draft at 20? Do they try to move up? Do they pick somewhere in the teens? Do they like if Rob Dillingham starts to go falling, do they look like do they think if Ron Holland can be an impact guy, right? I don't know. There's so much variance with Cleveland based on the moves they've already made, the kind of impending Donovan Mitchell situation, seemingly running it back with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. I'm just very intrigued as to what's happening in Cleveland right now.
Yeah. I honestly think that there's a little smoke to the Donovan Mitchell to the Knicks I think there's potentially some action there. I think the Knicks really are dying to get over the hump. I think they felt really close this year. Again, I don't know how the money works out. I haven't run the trade simulator or anything like that to try to figure out what players that is. But I think the Knicks are going to be in play for Donovan Mitchell, which I think in turn likely means that Garland stays, which in turn means they're going to have to find a wing somewhere. Is it Holland? Is it, something along those lines that's going to have to fill that? Or is it another move? Maybe it's a 3-team trade and they get Ingram as a wing guy, and who knows, right? I think Mitchell to the Knicks is in play, though. So I think Cleveland could be a pivotal, maybe a pivot point for some of these moves within the draft. I'm going to cop out a little bit, and I'm going to say that the San Antonio Spurs is the team that I'm really, really, really interested in, especially the first round, because they have picks the 4 and 8. And I think that there are several players in this draft that fit if they fall. I think if Reed Shepherd gets past Houston at 3, I think he'd be a great fit because you're not going to ask him to be a defensive stopper. You've got Wembanyama erasing everything that comes anywhere near the rim. And you just ask Reed Shepherd to be who he was at Kentucky, just be that scorer, that shooter. I think that would be a really great fit if Ryan's Houston Rockets decide they're going to pass on Reed Shepherd there. I think having 2 picks in the top 10 after getting what looks like the next generational guy in Victor Wembanyama, it looks like the hype was exactly what we're getting in the NBA. I think you got yourself in a position where you could maybe move one of those to get a vet, right? If you think you're closer than you would have thought you'd be after year 1 with Vic, maybe, and of course in Pop we trust, right? We know Pop knows how to build a dynasty. So whatever move they're going to make, I have to agree with is probably going to be the best move. But I'm really intrigued with a team that's got 2 picks in the top 10, that had a supernova, that also had a couple of pieces around him show that they could be part of a winning franchise as well. I think the Spurs, this could be one of those drafts that we look back and say, they stole a guy that ended up being like Manu Ginobili, right? Or something along those lines that none of us were talking about. And maybe that's a guy in the second round. Maybe pick 4 and 8 aren't the picks where they get that guy. But I think, the Spurs for me are the team that really kind of moves the needle based on what we saw from 2023 number 1 pick Victor Wembanyama and how they're going to build that roster around him. I've seen some speculation that they might go Klingon. That'd be a really, really interesting pairing at the 4 or 5, positionless backcourt or front court with 7'3" Klingon and 7'5" Victor Wembanyama, who both have wingspans much bigger than their measured height. And can be erasers around the rim. So I think the Spurs for me are the big team that I'm really watching outside of course, my fandom for the Wizards. Ryan, back to you, buddy. Round robin here. Another team that you're intrigued by?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. I think y'all brought up some of the obvious ones, right? I think the guys who have a lot of equity in this draft are really interesting. I'm going to throw out one that unfortunately I think someone would have cared about. I think OKC is really interesting in this draft with the amount of capital they have just throughout, I believe, till the heat death of the universe. They probably can do a lot of really interesting things that other teams can't, right? If on draft night somebody becomes available, are they get first dibs, right? Like that's pretty much how it works. I think that's interesting because at some point you have to consolidate something. Like they have too much. I think some of the later first round guys are interesting, right? I think Denver's interesting. Like, is there a big they want to get to like help out Jokic a little bit? There's probably going to be some guys available. It'll be interesting to see the choices they make there. Same with the Celtics, right? If we're saying this is a draft that fills out your roster, did the NBA help the Celtics again by giving them the 30th pick in a draft where maybe 20 through 40 is like roughly the same like caliber of player? I mean, come on, they're just handing them championships.
It's unbelievable. The collusion.
Soon, Roger Goodell's going to get involved, and he's going to start handing them championships. He's going to be like half of the cap for the Pats get to go to the Celtics.
We did talk about DJ Burns earlier.
I can see it now. Bud Selig fired for colluding with Danny Ainge to help the Celtics.
Yeah, I think the Celtics have an interesting chance there, right? Because there's just a lot of guys they could take front court help as well, similar to Denver, and also Toronto. Toronto's in such a weird spot. Like their team is really interesting. You know, we kind of know the guys they like to have. You know, Scotty Barnes just got his money, so like, what do they surround around him? Yeah, do they? Good for him. Do they keep going that route and just keep taking big playmakers? Do they feel like do they realize they're not ready yet and they kind of like swing, you know, at that? Like, are they trading up? Are they trading out? Like, I think they're in a weird spot as well with like how they're building their team, right? I know it's around Scotty Barnes, but what else is it? Is it quickly? Is it, you know, like, I don't know. I don't know what that answer is. So it'd be interesting to see if that direction becomes more obvious with what they do in this draft.
Yeah.
I hope that Toronto drafts John Furphy and they just take the exact same player 2 years in a row from the exact same school. That's what I would like to see happen.
I hope Furphy shows up in a red tuxedo.
Yes.
What if they take the best Canadian player in the draft, Zach Edey, and they're just massive? Like, think how big they are. They got like 4, 6, 10 plus. Yeah, that team's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many options. I have no idea what they're going to do. Yeah. Yeah. Scotty Barnes is their point guard and he's 6'8".
Could happen.
Bentley, who's another team you're looking at?
So I was gonna go with Boston, only because the most recent mock that I saw had Kyle Filipowski ending up in Boston with the 30th overall pick. As we know,
he fit in pretty well in Boston.
2-hip flip near and dear to my heart. I actually do think it would be an incredible fit for him.
Yeah.
With
jokes aside, yeah.
Yeah, with Al Horford kind of coming to the end of his career, Ryan thinks he's going to play another year. It wouldn't shock me if he retired. I get that he's under contract, but like, even if he's still under contract, you can bring in Filipowski or a guy of similar ilk, right? Flip is able to stretch the floor as a big. He's a pretty good rebounder. He's a solid off-ball defender. I'm not going to tell you that he can match up with, you know, the bigs in the NBA today one-on-one, but he has the wingspan and he has the athleticism, I think, to be an effective off-ball defender. And obviously his offensive game kind of speaks for itself. He can dribble, he can shoot, he can pass, he can do all the things you want from a modern big in the NBA today. So I was going to say Boston, but I'm going to switch my answer here. I'm going to say Philadelphia, only for the simple fact that they have like 3 guys on their roster that are under contract for next year. I'm not entirely sure what exactly they're going to do. And this draft just confuses the fuck out of me, right? So, like, are they going to try to move up? I don't know. Are they going to try to trade out? Maybe. I just simply have no idea. And that's a team that has, like, very conflicting timelines, too, right? Like, is Maxey ready to be the second best player on a championship team? I don't know. Can Embiid be the best player on a championship team? I also don't know that. But I do know that Maxey is young and Embiid is not. So, like, you have to kind of mold the two of them together. Meld, that's the word I'm looking for. You have to meld the two timelines of your young up-and-coming superstar in Maxey and your, you know, I'm not going to say out of his prime, but aging superstar in former MVP in Joel Embiid, and kind of build your roster with players around them that can get you over the hump and beat Boston in the Eastern Conference, right? So it's very interesting to me. Are they going to try to move up for one of these guys that they think might be better than somebody else, or if they value someone more than one of these other teams? I don't know, right? Like, what are they going to do? And as we know, literally nothing is off the table with Daryl Morey.
Yeah, right.
He always makes it interesting in the offseason. He's an offseason superstar. And we're technically in the offseason. So I'm just excited to see what Daryl Morey does, how he goes about building this roster. And it starts on draft night, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, Embiid's aging in dog years, so you got to take that into consideration too, right? Can you rely on him being there the next 2-3 years? Or what's your horizon, right? What's your horizon that you're building toward in order to compete for that championship? How many years? How long is your window even going to be open? One team that I'm really intrigued by is Atlanta, and not for the reason that they have the top pick. I'm really excited about the prospects, and it probably won't happen now that I've mentioned it. It's like mentioning Beetlejuice, and things just go bad. But I am really intrigued by the prospect of them tearing it down and really making a run at a rebuild instead of being the perennial 500 club that they've been. I think over the last 10 years, they've literally been 500 cumulatively, and they've finished at or near, like within a game of 500, like 8 of those 10 years. I'm really intrigued by whether or not they're going to try to make some moves in the form of Trae Young and or DeJounte Murray. And I think it'd be really interesting if they went the and route there, because I think that you're looking at, I just mentioned the Spurs a moment ago. You're looking at a team that I think Trae Young could be a pretty good fit there, because again, you're never going to have to ask him to even play defense with Vic the Eraser behind him. And we all know how terrible Trae Young is on defense from an effort and ability standpoint. I think he could be a decent fit there with his ability to both facilitate and shoot. Now, health is always a concern with him. And then DeJounte Murray, I think, could be a fit on a number of teams across the league. So could Atlanta end up with 3 first-round picks this year, or do they trade them for strictly future capital? Is it this year and future years, that sort of thing? I think from the standpoint of, if Atlanta makes the decision that they are going to tear this thing down and actually really rebuild, which we thought but got the feint last year on the John Collins trade, we thought maybe that was an indication that Atlanta was going to lean into a rebuild, but they didn't. And they, of course, finished right around 500 again this year. I'm really curious to see if they are actually going to tear that Band-Aid off, because I don't think that they can win with this roster, and I don't think that they have the assets to build around this roster. They got the first pick in the worst draft that they could have if they were going to try to build around Trae Young and or DeJounte Murray. So I'm hoping, right, fingers crossed, I'm going to, in my head, I'm going to try to manifest like that Atlanta's going to tear it down and they're going to be really busy on draft night. So from that perspective, I'm intrigued to watch and see if that happens. If it doesn't happen, I'll eat my crow next week. But I think that they've got some interesting potential to make some noise in this draft. All right. Any teams, any alibis that either you want to bring up? Bentley, we'll go your way first. Any leftovers that you want to peel off the bone or anything?
I think just an honorable mention would be the Portland Trailblazers. It's always interesting anytime a team has 2 first-round draft picks, and talk about a team that is trying to figure out what in the fuck they're going to do with that roster, because who knows, right? I think they're pretty interesting. Should be fun to see on draft night. What, if anything,
also.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Ryan, any alibis for you? Any meat left on the bone?
No, really excited for the draft. I think it's gonna be very surprising. I would not be shocked if we come in here and go, wow, that was really weird. And I think that's good for, like, people are saying, I saw a tweet today. I just want to bring this up because I found it interesting, but I saw this tweet today where it said, hey, the draft is tomorrow and no one is talking about it.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, because like you watch basketball through the lens of Twitter highlights. Like that is why this 8 o'clock is when it starts. I think when it's like, hey, I only know the game through the lens of the superstar, which is like, that's not uncommon. I'm not saying like that's how the casual fan watches it. But people who like win games, this is like the draft where they win games, right? Like the edge you gain here could reflect on your franchise for a decade.
Yeah.
And maybe that's like a little hyperbolic, but I honestly believe that's true, right? If you come out of this draft with a 4th guy, like on your championship team, like you're so far ahead of everybody else, right? Like they're going to have to pay that guy 3 times as much to come to their team. They don't get to, he's going to be 5 years older than him, right? Like it's just so much value here. There's so much potential. I also just love watching these guys realize their dreams. That's something that I like, if there's not like if you have no empathy, like maybe it doesn't do anything for you, but it really hits me pretty hard. Like people that are like, no one's talking about it. It's like I absolutely love seeing a guy like bring his parents and be like, hey, this is what you worked for. This is what you raised me. Like, right, I worked hard. Like I got it. I love that stuff. Me and my girlfriend also do a outfit review of all the prospects, so that's a good time as well. She doesn't know
that.
She doesn't know anything about pretty much any of them, but she will give her opinion on how they dress during the draft. And she's still harping on Walker Kessler to this day, and I don't think she knows who Walker Kessler plays for.
And that's okay.
Yeah. So, find what you enjoy about a draft and watch it. Stop complaining because there's no Victor Wembanyama in this draft. That's just a lazy take, in my opinion.
All right. So I'm going to throw out a question here that we are not going to be able to answer until 2029, 2030. So we've spent this whole episode talking about this is not a draft we would call talent rich. This is not Victor Wembanyama. This is not 03. This is not a draft that you're looking at, oh, there's a top 5 and then there's, everybody else, right? This is a draft that, as Ryan mentioned, if you find your number 4 on the championship team, you are ahead of the game in this draft. So I'm going to put you both on the spot. You get one choice. In 2029, 2030, the one superstar out of this draft will be, and I'll give you a moment, and I'm going to talk about mine first because I kind of put you guys on the spot with this. But my pick for the one superstar in this draft is going to be, and I'm going to steal a little bit from Bentley here. Rob Dillingham is my pick to be the guy we're going to talk about in 29-30 as the team that takes him. Hit a home run with Rob Dillingham because, one, the pedigree, right? We've talked a lot on this show about Kentucky guards, and you don't talk a lot about them. And then, of course, they become superstars in the NBA, yada, yada. Maybe not superstars, but they become all-stars in the NBA, a lot of them. So Rob Dillingham, I think his game translates to the NBA maybe better than anybody in this draft, but really, really well. I think his ability to be both an offense first, but also a bit of a facilitator as a point guard, his ability to score at 3 levels in the college game, as long as that translates in the NBA and he's able to continue that ability to knock down shots. And I think his headiness and the way that he's able to initiate an offense, I think he has the opportunity to succeed, of course, situation dependent, but I think Rob Dillingham is my guy that I'm going to put my chips in the middle of the table and say, if there's one superstar from this draft, it's him. Who wants to go first now that I've put you guys on the spot?
I have an easy one. So
all right, go ahead, Ryan.
I think the only person that I see with a reasonable expectation to be a superstar, and reasonable is still very low, but I'm saying reasonable as in like there's like a vision of it, is Ron Holland. That's the guy that if he has the athleticism, he's got the motor, he's got a lot of the tools that you want, right? He has the pedigree. He was the number 1 high school player in his class. Can't shoot. He's got a hitch in his shot. He's going to have to redo his shot, but he's big. He's athletic. He works hard, really good defender. Like if he becomes a 20-point per game scorer, like that's in superstar territory in my opinion. So that's the guy I see where that's like a top 5% outcome, but that might be the highest of anybody, of any, like, how many guys have above a 1% chance, in this class. So I would take him because I think he's got all the skills that you look for in a superstar. There's a lot of guys who I think could be all-stars, to include Rob Dillingham. I think that's a good take. He might be the first all-star in this class just because of his scoring ability, and he's already got it, right? But I think Ron Holland got the athleticism. He's young. He's got the motor. Needs to work on the decision-making and the shooting, but like those are things you can get better at hypothetically. So that's the bet I would take.
Hopefully, fixing that hitch in his shot goes better than Markelle Fultz.
Yeah, he's got like a very like Jaylen Brown-esque like profile to me though. Like similar, like the handle's not amazing, but the everything else like looks pretty good. And like even Jaylen Brown didn't have a hitch in a shot, but wasn't a great jump shooter at first. And now look at him, like we feel pretty good off the dribble and stuff. So like I'm not saying he's Jaylen Brown, but like that's like where I see his like high end result. So
yeah, okay. Bentley, who's your pick?
So I really waffled here back and forth. So I'm going to answer the question, but I'm going to answer it a little differently than you guys might be expecting. So my answer to the question of who's going to be the one we're talking about in 2029 is whoever the Spurs draft at number 4. I have two options here. My initial thought was Reed Sheppard. If Reed Sheppard ends up in San Antonio at the number 4 pick, he will be a player that we talk about significantly in 2029, just because he's playing with Vic. I think he has a chance to absolutely flourish in San Antonio. They will find a way to make him a very good NBA player. That man is fucking incredible at shooting the basketball. He is extremely smart, and he plays. God, I hate that I'm going to say this. He plays it the right way. I hate that I just said that.
Yeah. We got our cookie cutter archetype.
I really wanted to take Rob Dillingham, for the record. I wanted to take Rob Dillingham. And if he ends up in San Antonio, then maybe we can both be right, Gary.
Yeah. I've seen Dillingham mock to San Antonio, so maybe we'll have our chips in the same pot.
So my second answer. So my answer is probably Reed Sheppard, right? Like most, I have the highest chance of being correct with Reed Sheppard. Secondary, so I'm copying out here, Modest Buzelis. If he also ends up in San Antonio, even if he's 8 to San Antonio, I think that kid, his basketball IQ, I believe, is continuing to grow, but it already is very high just from how much I've watched him play. I've watched him play more than a lot of the other foreign guys in the draft, right? This is a kid that coming out of high school could have played, or coming out of wherever he came. I don't know how the school systems work, right? Not a big school guy. He could have picked any school, any college in the United States to go play for, and they would have given him a scholarship on the spot, I believe. He chose to not do that. And then he kind of struggled in the G League. His shooting was not up to snuff. I get it. I said the same thing about Castle, right? Poor shooting performance this past season. I tend to believe that young players like that really play to the level of their surroundings, right? Unless you truly are like a special player, right? Which I'm not sure that anyone in this draft really is that level of guy. So it kind of makes sense to me that he struggled a little bit shooting the ball when he was playing in kind of a lesser league than what he maybe should have been playing in, right? But if he ends up, defense, rebounding, passing the ball, very heady player, right? I think that he has a chance to be a very, very good basketball player if he goes to San Antonio. But I'm going to go with Reed Sheppard. My actual answer is just whoever goes to San Antonio.
I like it. All right. Well, that brings us to our close here. I want to go around the room. Bentley, any closing thoughts for us on our way out?
Jared McCain is the best shooter in this draft. He proved it last year. He proved it last year in college. He was the best freshman shooter in the country. Wasn't the best freshman in the country. He's the best freshman shooter. He's extremely effective at shooting on the move. He's extremely effective at catch and shoot, and he's an absolute dog defensively. I get that he's undersized, but he's a stocky player. He's extremely quick. He's fast up and down the court, and he is a freaking fighter despite whatever his TikToks might show you.
Ryan, any closing thoughts?
No, I don't have any. I just am not surprised that, of course, the Duke comment has to be the last one. It just so predictable. But no, I'm excited. Like I said, I'm excited to talk about it on the back end. Maybe we can grade it at the end, like good hot take machines do.
Yeah.
And we can be like, wow, that was an A+ because that guy in 10 years will love him. So that's how it works. So yeah, I'm excited for it.
For sure. Yeah, it could be a lot of action in this draft. As Ryan astutely pointed out, the unknown or the unclear can sometimes breed a lot of movement. So excited about the draft next couple nights. We'll be back here to wrap it up for you guys. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate all the comments, all the engagement in the chat. Look forward to more of that. But for Ryan and Bentley and everybody here at Backyard Sports, this has been a special off-schedule episode of Backyard Buckets, brought to you by Backyard Sports. We are out.